Hey guys, welcome to Bio Bulletin. I'm Viven, and this is a new podcast where we're going to discuss the new relevant information coming into the science world.
Hi, I'm Kanishka, and on the podcast, we will discuss everything from mosquitoes to nanotechnology and delve deeper into issues including ethics, feasibility, socioeconomic factors, and sustainability of everything we discuss.
Hi, I'm Ashish. Today's topic will be about how malaria-resistant mosquitoes could be the future of malaria prevention.
So, a brief intro to malaria. It's a possibly fatal tropical disease spread by mosquitoes. In Plasmodium, this is where the parasite is spread, and female mosquitoes pass the parasite into the bloodstream upon biting the victim.
So, malaria claims almost 400,000 lives a year and is prevalent in large areas of Africa and Asia, including Central and South America, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and parts of the Middle East as well.
To keep mosquitoes from transmitting malaria, scientists have created microbes which are placed in the mosquito's gut. This microbe is a distant relative of fungi that inhabits other organisms. It is a symbiote, which is a parasite which lives associated with its host. And this tends to improve the host's survival because they use the host to survive, and they improve the host's survival rate to ensure that they do not die out. And this particular type of symbiote gets passed through offspring, hence increasing the survival rate of mosquitoes with this gene even more.
So, Ashish, I'm just curious, do you know how they edit the gene to put it into the mosquitoes?
Yeah, so the research team used the CRISPR-Cas9 system, which permits precise DNA editing, and they deleted a certain type of gene. It was called FREP1, and this has been deleted from the Anopheles mosquitoes, which are the chief transmitters of the most pathogenic type of malaria. You obviously know that. So, like within the modified mosquitoes, the malaria parasites were much less likely, 99.5% less likely to survive and multiply, essentially. So there was actually the chief investigator. Sorry, quickly, you can go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so I've heard from my research about the gene being a dominant gene, meaning that the chances of it being passed on to its offspring are extremely increased because only one of its alleles need to be passed on, obviously, for the defense to be present, basically. So
You're absolutely right, and this is why this gene is so revolutionary, because essentially you only need to put it in one of these male mosquitoes, and when they reproduce, this gene is then expressed in their offspring. So we could really easily end malaria this way, and this is what scientists are really trying to push ahead. And this is why this is such a hot topic in the news at the moment.
yeah, so I mean, I've seen that isn't it a California-based lab that's been doing the research, and I think they did an experiment where they used a tracer gene where the mosquitoes that had the gene had like fluorescent red eyes, sorry, and I think upon that testing they found that close to 100, I think it was 99.5% of of mosquitoes actually passed on the gene to their offspring, which is obviously an astounding amount and seems to be very promising.
Yeah, that is a very promising number. Especially, you mentioned the death toll at 405,000 per year, and 220 million people infected per year, which is, if you talk about COVID cases, which is at 2 million, you're talking about 200 times the amount. And that's a ridiculous number. And you can see the effects of COVID, but people are going unnoticed about this malaria infection because we've been so used to hearing about it in the news. But we need to stop desensitizing ourselves to it and start really taking a look at how we can end this vicious infection. And it's really making a lot of trouble in the African regions where WHO are set up, especially in the Central African Republic.
I mean,
Sorry, Vivian, do you have anything to add?
how long sorry, I was just going to say, how long do you think it's realistic to expect these to be released in, like for the genetically engineered mosquitoes to actually be spread to try and counter malaria?
They still haven't done a field test yet, which is quite disappointing because this has been 4 years ago. They've started this research and they've managed to successfully do one gene and one test on about 100 male mosquitoes. So they need to really try and push this ahead, but obviously it's on the back burner now due to coronavirus. And hopefully, we're looking at 2025, around that time, where we can really start mass producing this after having immense checks. But I mean, COVID's been a havoc on many things, including this. If this didn't happen, we'd probably be expecting in a year or two. So it's coming soon in terms of biology and news type. It's quite recent, quite soon as well.
I remember reading somewhere it said a postdoctoral researcher, his name was Morgan Geyer, said that using a living organism as a prevention or treatment isn't new, but requires many questions to be answered first. He went on to like ask questions like, is there another potential host for the parasite that could spread it out of control? Whether the mechanism of malaria control through parasite infection, and would it be possible or safer to mimic it instead of using the entire parasite? So they might have some answers already, but it's not a trivial decision. And so, like you said, Ashish, it will likely take time.
I mean, I think that's quite interesting because obviously from realistically a possible issue would be if you were to introduce malaria resistant mosquitoes, but the actual malaria were to in some way modify itself by mutation to overcome the resistance, so to speak. So that could be a potential issue if anyone has like a response to that or something.
I mean, I personally think that mosquitoes are a pest, and for many people in Central Africa, they don't have much purpose. I mean, obviously there are a lot of tough things to do to exterminate them because they have a place in the food chain. They also they're predators for some animals, and they themselves are prey for others. And I understand this, but in the same way, it's killing millions of people every year. And I don't think there should be any ethical perspective, because if we're talking from a utilitarian perspective, a human life is, I personally believe, much more than a mosquito life. I mean, you just think about lifespan. A mosquito lives for 7 days, right? A human could potentially live for 100 years. And unfortunately, due to these 7 days animals, the average life expectancy in the Central African Republic is at 31 years old. Just think about that stat. 31 years old.
I think equally, yes, that's correct. But from a stewardship, like type of Christian perspective, that would tend to agree with utilitarianism, where it's kind of like the human life would be worth saving. But equally, I think it is worth kind of just entertaining the thought that perhaps we don't know enough yet to actually release malaria-resistant mosquitoes into a potentially untested environment without any real consent from the people which malaria affects. And, you know, I know that the actual labs which have been doing the testing have been quite closed off with how much testing they've been doing, how much open field testing they've been doing, and stuff like that. So, in my opinion, I feel like more should be done before we realistically release these into the world.
I would agree with that, but that being said, we also don't want to waste any time. I'm sure Viven would agree. After his reading, he would understand that the crisis in Africa is a real urgency. I think that 67% of these people that are being affected from malaria and dying are under 5, and it's really sad to see these numbers being put out. And we talk about stuff like coronavirus, but to put that into perspective, it's not even a tenth of the number. Just kids, not even a tenth of the world deaths are just kids dying from malaria in Africa. I mean, but that's enough to ponder on.
What I've read about was, I understand how it's effective, but the total funding for malaria control and elimination, that's what's so wonderful to hear, you know? It says that the funding reached an estimated $2.7 billion US dollars in 2018. That's contributions from governments of endemic countries, which also amounted to $900 million. So that's representative of 30% of total funding. So it shows people do care about the issue. It's just harder to come across that microbe.
I mean, that's obviously a huge amount of money, but my kind of viewpoint is, do you not think there are other ways which that money could potentially be used? Because yes, malaria is of course a huge issue. I'm not denying that in any way.
Yeah.
But like Ashish mentioned, the actual conditions in the places where people are living isn't really helping the situation either. So if you were to, for example, make movements towards reducing the amount of stagnant pools of water where these mosquitoes breed, or improve infrastructure for hospitals and get better training for doctors, surely that would also see a dramatic decrease in the amount of deaths and a dramatic decrease in the amount of deaths for other diseases. So not only malaria, but any disease really, and just improve life expectancy on the whole rather than targeting a single disease.
I mean, personally, after a lot of research, I mean, this is one of the points I knew would come up. So I've really prepared notes for this part, and I know for sure that what you're saying, while I understand it and it's logical, it's actually not really the case. So the CRISPR-Cas9 system is one of the cheapest gene editing systems out there. And if you remember correctly, I said that if we infect 100 of these mosquitoes with this microbe, and we send them out to the wild, they'll reproduce and bring the number of malaria-resistant mosquitoes up, because they're going to be reproducing, and this allele will be expressed in their offspring. So in true facts, we don't actually have to release that many. We could even get away with releasing just one of these mosquitoes, provided natural selection doesn't kill it off immediately.
I mean, of course, that would take a huge amount of time if you just released one. But yeah,
obviously. So there are leading economists around the world working out the solution, finding out the perfect balance between cost-saving methods and the correct amount to increase the speed at which we can end malaria. And furthermore, if we start alleviating this problem from Central Africa, the tourism will go up. I mean, I don't know about you, but a lot of people from this country are not willing to visit Africa or other such tropical countries due to the malaria factor. And we also have to take a lot of jabs. So these are the factors that people look at when they're trying to go on holiday, etc., etc. And if we reduce that, the money coming in from tourism will bring up the government's, the GDP in the country, and then hopefully we will see a future where Africa can be one of the leading powers, and we can start building up these buildings and increase the funding in other such areas like running water, clean housing, personal hygiene needs to be up as well. So that's my 2 cents on it. But I think that this is the stem of the problem, and once we finish malaria, we can move on to getting Africa back to its rightful place.
Yeah, I think that makes sense overall. But equally, I would like to shed light, so to speak, on the kind of religious viewpoint on gene editing, because obviously, yes, this is about malaria, but it also highlights the wider issue of if we do start editing genes, how will that affect other parts of life? Will that go to commercial use? And will we eventually start seeing farmers, for example, editing plumper chickens to get higher revenue? Or where will that lead us? Because from a Christian perspective, and my perspective as a Christian, I feel like gene editing is somewhat against the very nature of creation, and in a way against the whole idea of nature itself, because it kind of removes that key factor of it being, if you're religious, spiritual, or God-made, so to speak. And when we start delving into the real, like, fine details of editing genes, I feel like you get into an endless cycle of issues where it could lead to. And I feel like really tight restrictions need to be put in place if we are to use this on a wider scale.
I absolutely agree with you. And as a Hindu, I can vouch for the fact that we shouldn't tamper, and who's to be playing God here, because we shouldn't be tampering with God-made creations. And there are at the moment that lab has been under very tight restrictions and being very closely monitored by WHO and other such organizations which monitor this sort of thing. And tomorrow, if there are people asking for designer babies, which are when we change the gene editing of a fetus to make sure they have attributes that the parents like. And these are the sorts of ethical issues which gene editing raises. And I personally agree with you. And this certain type of CRISPR-Cas9 system, it has to be under tight lockdown. There has to be very clear and very focused understanding of how we're going to use this and why we're going to use this. It should only be used to benefit people who are disadvantaged. We cannot be benefiting first world countries with the designer babies, or getting even farmers to getting plumper chickens, etc., because that is a prospect that we can see coming. And organizations really need to understand that and take pride in the fact that we've got this far, but also not become complacent that we start using this to better the human race in an unethical way.
Exactly. I completely agree with you. I, in essence, it's just how humans have gone very far, and I think all of us share that opinion. Humans have gone beyond what we truly should, like what we should know already. Science has opened up so many new windows for us. It would be terrible to let it go into the wrong hands.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Of course, if it were to get into the wrong hands, as with anything, it would be disastrous. But there's that kind of whole argument which came up when people were discussing the idea of um, um, euthanasia and voluntary euthanasia, about that kind of slippery slope threat where if you do introduce voluntary euthanasia, how long would it be till involuntary euthanasia starts happening? Equally, if you do introduce genome editing, how long will it be until commercial genome editing starts happening? And fundamentally, even though we're talking about it now, it is still a very new technology. And I feel like in the next, 30, 40 years, I feel like we will at some point start to see commercial genome editing, which I think would be a real issue. And at that point, I feel like we are playing God in a way. But
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's the really gray area, isn't it? And with anything really, and it's risk reward, it all comes down to that. And it's like we're starting to see genetically modified crops. We got big outcries against that, and who knows, next is going to be genetically modified animals. I mean, they're starting to do little things in terms of selective breeding, but that could easily just span out to gene editing. And this is really the scary part, where everything starts off when we're trying to help someone, and then we move on to trying to better us. And I think it's at that point where we need to realize that something like gene editing, something so serious and so powerful, shouldn't be put in the wrong hands, and should really, I would urge them to try and really monitor this and make sure that none of this research gets out. And although it may seem secretive and perhaps not falling in line with the transparency that we see and the Freedom of Speech and Freedom of Information Act, we also need to understand that certain things are too dangerous to be put in the hands of the common public, because it may be one or two people that could use it for the wrong things.
That's true. I think I read somewhere it said the labs working on the microbe and such, they haven't been open with what they've done to contain the mosquitoes.
Yeah, I read that as well. I read that there had been so obviously the lab's California based, and I saw an article which basically said that when asked what they'd been doing, like to contain mosquitoes, they'd been very vague with answers. And I feel like with something so powerful, it's very important that they're open and upfront with how they're containing the mosquitoes. And if this is a new technology, so if these mosquitoes were to get out prematurely, there could be unforeseen ecological and social impacts, really, because we have not as of yet done proper testing in an open field test or any such similar test to actually get an insight into what happens when these mosquitoes do breed properly and how does that affect the world around us. We know how it affects other mosquitoes and how it affects the malaria parasite, but how does that affect other animals? And I think those tests really need to be done before we start using it.
For sure. And I, without understanding the ramifications of what this could have on the environmental cycle in many different places, because every place isn't the same. There are slight differences in climates, etc., and there are differences in animals, prey, predators. So we definitely need to do more testing, and I think that's the main thing that we need to work on right now: getting testing done, getting field testing done, which is the most important thing, so we can see how it really does help, if it helps.
Yeah,
And what we do need to make sure is that we do not have another case of MSRAs and have another superbug coming out. We need to make sure that there's no way that this gene can turn on us, because if that's the case,
I think that's a very hard thing to guarantee, though, because the whole idea of the superbug is that you would not be able to guarantee it. Like, no one really predicted COVID coming, for example, or no one predicted malaria coming when it first came out. And I think another thing which would really have to check is that no new diseases would be formed, for one, and no second strands of malaria parasites would develop as a result of kind of evolution of the mosquitoes and of the parasite. And furthermore, that there's no like novel genes that affect us as humans, and the side effects are avoided, because you never know how that could affect us, and that's why I think the open field test is so important.
Viven, anything to add?
I think you guys have covered everything properly. It was just that it's going back a little bit. Given the recent developments in Africa and globally, you see the ongoing coronavirus pandemic, the current locust outbreak in Eastern Africa, and the full army bomb invasion that's been going on since 2016 is the most urgent call to action for scientists. And every point that you guys made, I completely agree. It's for scientists, science in general, policymakers, and development partners.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. That's it. I think you just need to make sure that the right people and the right authorities are focusing on the right problems at hand, and we can't just put everything on a back burner because of COVID. Because frankly, this is a problem that affects first world countries. We also have to look out for our fellow third world countries who, once some of their problems will get over, they can easily become second world or first world powers. So after we look at all of those factors and all of those viruses, I think the correct authorities need to get involved.
I think also going back a little bit though is, again, slightly important to consider what fundamental right we have to modify biological entities, because it's not really our right in a way. But of course I understand that it's a huge issue and needs to be dealt with. But I'd argue that there are other ways in which malaria could be treated and eradicated rather than necessarily genome editing.
Maybe. Anyway, so
if anyone has any videos or topics they'd like us to discuss, make sure you leave it in the Google Forms, which will be in the description below. Make sure to follow us on Instagram, comment below, like and subscribe to our channel for more interesting content. See you next week.
if anyone else has any questions